Live from the Business RadioX studio inside Renaissance Bank, the bank that specializes in understanding you. It's time for North Fulton Business Radio.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of North Fulton Business Radio. I'm John Ray, and folks, this is going to be a great show. I've been looking forward to welcoming John Ott to the studio. John is with Exceptional Leaders, and he's got a lot of insights to share with us today. Before we get to John, I just want to remind you that if you're at one of those big mega banks and you like that business about fake voices and chat bots, and if that's the way you like your banking delivered to you as a business, stay there. Don't come to Renaissance, because Renaissance believes in personal service. They answer their own phone. If you don't like that, don't come to Renaissance. If you don't like dealing with people one-on-one, don't come to Renaissance. I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here, folks, but seriously, if you're looking for a better banking experience for your business, go to renaissancebank.com and check them out. I think you'll be glad you did. Renaissance Bank, understanding you, member FDIC. And again, I want to welcome John Ott to the show. John is with Exceptional Leaders. John, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, John, so much for having me.
Delighted to have you. Let's talk about you and your business, your work, how you serving folks out there.
John, thank you for asking. I coach CEOs and business owners is the focus of my work.
Now, that's pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward.
That's pretty straight. I want to get into the details of that, of course.
Sure.
But let's talk about your journey and what led to this point in terms of coaching.
Yeah.
What got you here?
Man, that's a long story, but I'll try to keep it tight. So
it's only a 30-minute show, Joe.
Yeah. Okay. So let me take you back actually to when I was in college.
Okay.
I had friends who knew they wanted to be a doctor, who wanted to be a lawyer, wanted to be a college professor. I had a close friend who wanted to be in international business. And when the question came to me of what do you want to do, I just didn't know. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I had a mentor who said, what if instead of trying to figure out what the perfect job is for you, what if instead you tried to figure out what you're deeply curious about, and then you arranged your career around those curiosities? He said, if you do that, I think there'll come a point in your career where you're among a small group of people who are uniquely qualified to do some special things in the world. And I thought, that sounds like a pretty good approach to me. So it took a while, it took some years to discern what am I deeply curious about? And what I was able to come to are three things. One of them is how do groups of people work, which frankly is, I think, a study of leadership. That as the leader goes, so goes the group. So deeply curious about how groups and organizations work or don't work. Another thing I was deeply curious about is how do people grow and change? People do grow and change. And that's a deeply mysterious topic in and of itself. How does growth happen?
Yeah.
And then the third thing I was really curious about is communication. How does communication work? How do you effectively get ideas and concepts from one person to another person in a way that actually works? And so these three different realms of curiosity became the things that guided my career over the course of a couple of decades. And so I got to have a lot of different, really interesting work opportunities, but those were the threads that held it together. And then about 10 years ago, I found myself in a pivotal spot and I didn't know what to do. And my wife said, I know what to do. I said, what's that? She said, I think it's finally time for you to go out on your own. And I was terrified, John.
Were you?
I was terrified. We had 4 kids in the house and we were not set up at that point in time in a situation that I would recommend anybody go out on their own. But one of the ways I'll say it is this. There's a line in an old song by a guy named Rich Mullins. He said, I was lost enough to let myself be led. And that's right where I was. And I felt like I opened my hands and took a step of faith and a step of courage and found myself working squarely in the space of working with leaders in the process of growth.
What's your wife's name?
Shannon.
Let's shout out to Shannon.
Let's shout out to Shannon.
And let's talk about what Shannon saw in you that you didn't see yourself.
How long do we have?
Yeah, Shannon's asking that question too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I can tell you is that there have been a number of pivotal moments in my life where my wife spoke a word to me that sent me down a path I would not have otherwise gone down. And that was a significant one. I think there's a variety of things that she saw. I think she saw, like what she had said to me at certain points was when I would talk about, I'd like to go out and do this on my own. And she said to me, you're not ready yet. And she said this probably a couple of times, but the most recent time was 2 years before I went out on my own. This was been in 2014. She said, you're not ready yet. And she said, I think you need one more meaningful work opportunity following a really great leader before it's time for you to go do that. And I didn't like it. I didn't like that she said that at the time, but she was exactly right. And I went to work with a guy. His name's Kevin Reese. I'm going to give him a shout out.
Okay.
And he took me under his wing. He made me the president of his private capital group. And he gave me, I think, a graduate education in the legal and financial aspects of organizational life. That was something that was absent from my preparation up to that point. So to learn about entity structures and ownership structures and how all of that works and how important that is to the undergirding of how organizations really work, and specifically what the life of a CEO or business owner looks like in light of that, critically important. And so it was the tail end of that where she's, I think you're ready, and took that leap.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're much more than this, as you just explained, but I guess one way to categorize you is you're a leadership coach. Mm-hmm. Talk about the concept of leadership and maybe how we should define leadership that we don't already.
That's a great question. That's something I've spent most of my adult life thinking about. And I'll say it this way, first of all, the way I currently define leadership is that leadership is a stewardship of power and opportunity. Leadership is a stewardship of power and opportunity. And sometimes when people hear that, they think, power? I don't have any power. I've even heard CEOs and business owners who really question how much power they actually have, which is in and of itself something that we tend to work on. I tend to work with a number of leaders on their relationship to their own power. What I often see in people is that they either have an inflated view of themselves, and so they take up more than their own space when they enter a room, that they're powered up. Or I also see leaders sometimes who are powered down. They take up less than the space that is rightfully theirs to take. And so they shrink back from certain situations. And so walking with a leader towards a right relationship with their own power is not something that happens overnight. It's something that takes some time. So anyway, that's the first part. Power. All of us have power. We have influence in relationship. And how do we steward that? And then the second part of that is opportunity. Each one of us has opportunity. And the question is, what will we do with the opportunity that we have? So that's how I think about or talk about leadership. And it does beg the question, so what is it that makes the biggest difference as it pertains to leadership? How do you know what really drives or accounts for a leader's effectiveness? That's a pretty contentious question in and of itself.
Let's get into that.
Okay.
Let's get into that, because if being a leader is stewarding power and opportunity, part of it is, first of all, definitional, yes. Right?
Yes, it is.
So what you just described is that leaders don't know how to define power.
Very often that's the case. And it's not because they're bad people.
No,
It's not something people think about all the time.
Right.
Which they shouldn't. What leaders need to be thinking about all the time is how do they steward their opportunity? In other words, how do they grow their business? How do they become more successful in the field of endeavor that they've set out to be successful in? And it's people like me who spend all day, every day thinking about how do we come alongside those folks and help them be more effective? What is it that's actually going to make them more effective? So that question is a question that's been on my mind for a long time. And I found myself back in 2006, 2007, my job was to coach volunteer leaders who led groups of other people. And so these are people, men and women who have full-time jobs themselves, who have volunteered to lead groups. And I got a chance to meet with them at best like 3 or 4 times a year. And we got to meet for 60 to 90 minutes. And so there was very little space for us to interact one-on-one. And I was always thinking, what are the few things that I could talk to them about that would have the biggest impact on their effectiveness as leaders? So this is a question that I'm carrying around. And I ended up one day meeting somebody for lunch, a guy named Tim Spiker. That's going to be another shout out here. He and I met for lunch at a Greek restaurant out in Gwinnett County. And less than 10 minutes into our first conversation, he slides a list of leadership competencies across the table to me. In fact, I've got that list.
Okay.
Right here. Not the very one. It's not the same list that he gave me. It's been reprinted.
Okay.
But he slid a list across the table to me, and it has 8 leadership competencies on it. And he says, there are 2 of these 8 leadership competencies that account for 77% of your effectiveness as a leader. 2.
Only 2.
Only 2. And here's the list. I'm going to give you the list. You ready? Align resources, develop talent, execute and follow through, inwardly sound, motivate and inspire, others focused, set direction, and think strategically. All 8 of those are critically important. And he said, but only 2 of them combined account for 77% of a leader's effectiveness. He said, now let's think about this for a minute. If each one of those was equally weighted, each of those competencies would account for 12.5% of a leader's effectiveness. So if you combine any 2, they'd account for 25% of a leader's effectiveness. He says our data tells us that 2 of these combined account for 77% of a leader's effectiveness. Which 2 do you think they are? He asked me. I don't remember what answer I gave him, but I have asked that question, John, to thousands of leaders over the past 15 to 20 years. And there's a lot of answers that come up that aren't the right answer, but they're really well reasoned. So people will say something like ensure execution. Of course, because if you're not getting stuff done, what business do you have being in business?
Sure.
Or they'll say something around thinking strategically, how important it is. That's really important, but that's not it. The answer to the question is being inwardly sound and others focused is what accounts for 77% of a leader's effectiveness. Being inwardly sound and others focused. What do you think about when you first hear that?
Now, the others focused, you're singing my song. But,
I can tell.
But the inwardly sound, let's dive into what that means.
Yeah, what does that mean? What first comes up for you when you hear the words inwardly sound?
Well, grounded.
Grounded. Perfect. What else comes up for you?
Are we in a coaching session here?
Oh.
I think we are. Certainly grounded character.
Character
is a word that comes up for me.
Absolutely. Let me give you a few more words to go along with.
Yeah, please.
This. So what we did, me and Tim and Vanessa Kiley, another person I'm going to give a shout out to, we said we've got to get really clear on what we mean by these terms, inwardly sound and others focused, because if we can get clearer, then we can accelerate meaningful developmental conversations. So what do we mean by inwardly sound? There's 5 terms, 6 terms actually, I'll explain that. Self-aware, principled, purposeful, holistically healthy, and secure and settled. Those 5 terms together. And then there's this idea of being emotionally mature. Emotionally mature is both inwardly sound and others focused. And I'll give you a quick preview. We'll hop over to others focused for a minute.
Yeah, let's do it.
Humble, attentive, curious, empathic, loving, and emotionally mature. Again, emotionally mature shows up in both places.
Sure.
And so we've got definitions for each of those. You talked about character just a minute ago. That's where principled is where we would talk about character.
Yeah.
And the way we define that is steadfast in discerning and doing what is right. That's the way we define principled. One of my favorite ones, this is one that I work with leaders on all the time, is becoming more purposeful. And the way we define purposeful is living aligned with who you truly are and what you really want. So there's a big discernment process in coming to see more clearly, who am I? Truly, who am I? Not who have I told myself I was, who do other people say that I am, but who am I? And really, what do I want? And so discovering those things and then having the courage to align your life accordingly. That's a major step. It won't surprise you, I don't think, John, to know that there's a number of CEOs and business owners I work with who are asking that question. Now, they don't really have many places to ask that question, but they're saying, I've built this business. I'm not sure that I actually like the business that I built, and I don't know that I want to keep doing what I'm doing. That's not an uncommon dilemma that I find leaders in. And so that becomes a part of what we do together is we unpack that and figure out who they truly are and what they really want.
That's a difficult place to be.
It is.
Because so many business owners have their identity tied up in their business.
Oh, man.
And so when you have your identity tied up in your business and you're asking questions like that, that can be really
defeating, unsettling.
Yeah.
Because it's a question that feels even dangerous to ask, because it's like, what if I end up answering that question in a way that means I need to move away from my business? That's terrifying for a lot of folks. The identity thing, the compensation thing, the how do other people perceive me and think of me? What would I do if I didn't do this? Those are all questions. And what I've seen, and John, this won't surprise you, I'm sure. What I've seen is that the closer you get to the top of the organization, the more isolated and lonely it becomes. Very often, men and women who lead organizations, they don't have anywhere to go with some of these big questions. Even if they have a supportive leadership team, and many don't, even if they have a supportive and loving spouse, which many don't, even if they have friends, which many don't, even if they have a board that has their back, and many don't, there's typically not any one place where they can take those questions and find somebody who cares about them personally, but also has something of meaning to offer them that might help them get unstuck from wherever they are.
Folks, we're here chatting with John Ott. John is with Exceptional Leaders. I want to follow up on that, John. Is that feeling a product of the times we are in? I think a lot of people attribute it to the times we're in because just these times seem so chaotic in so many different ways and are causing people to question. Or does it simply have to do with the position that business owners have gotten to in their journey, and that this is something that business owners have dealt with for a long time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the definitive answer to that question. When I think about human nature, there's definitely new things that are happening all the time. And I also think about the truth that there's nothing new under the sun. And my sense about human nature is that when you lead, it does tend to be somewhat of an isolating experience, regardless of what level of leadership you find yourself at. And the farther up you go in leadership, the less people there are who can relate to what's going on in your life. I do think that we live in increasingly isolated times. And I think we live in an era where there's so much opportunity that people have a chance to grow something and to grow it pretty quickly and to rise up into a leadership position very fast and maybe not be equipped to handle the challenges that come with leadership at that level. Through no fault of their own, it's just the way life has unfolded. And so where do they turn to find out, how do I actually lead at this level in a way that I enjoy, in a way that's sustainable for me, in a way that will generate success long-term for what I'm involved in?
So what you're saying is the business has grown faster than the leadership capacity.
Oftentimes.
Yeah.
Oftentimes. And I think also the nature of a business owner who also happens to be a founder, which not everybody's the founder of the business that happens often. It grows in such a way that when they're taking on the responsibilities of the organization, they often find themselves skipping levels of leadership along the way. And so there's certain types of equipping that they didn't get. And one of the things that we talk about often is that anything of essence that you leave out, it will come back to bite you. And so how do we go back and make sure that they're getting all of the equipping that they need so that they can thrive in the current context that they find themselves in?
Let's talk a little bit about those leaders that they've, again, as you say, their growth is maybe in the business has outstripped leadership capacity, and they find themselves really suddenly at maybe even a crisis moment, right? Mm-hmm. And what are the characteristics of those? I guess what I'm getting at is, what do those leaders, what symptoms do they need to see in either the business or themselves to know they're at that point and that maybe they need to engage with you as a coach?
I can tell you what I think are common traits of people who I have worked with.
Okay.
And I wouldn't say they all share all of these traits, but very often leaders find themselves at a crossroads where important decisions need to be made and they're not sure which way to go. And they're not sure where to turn. One of the challenges of being in leadership and being in business ownership is sometimes you wonder what the motives are of the people who are speaking in to your situation. How pure are those motives? There's a great scene in the old show, The West Wing, where President Bartlett hires a therapist who comes and sits with him. And I love the line. The therapist says, he said, "Mr. Bartlett, I may be the only person in your life who does not care that you're the president of the United States." And that's a little bit of an overstatement to say of how I show up with my clients, but to engage the person who occupies the office and to see that person, that they're dealing with all the same types of struggles and wonderings and questions and desires that any person is. But because of that isolation, it's harder for them to find the kind of guidance or counsel or straightforwardness that I think they want. So anyway, standing at a crossroads, not quite sure where to go. One of the, let's see, how would I say this? I think an example that really typifies, I had a guy reach out to me in our first phone call, just getting to know each other a little bit. And this would be another example of a quality. He said, I've been trying for years to double the size of my business. And I've tried a lot of different things and nothing seems to be working. He said, I'm starting to have the idea or the wondering, I wonder if I'm the impediment. I wonder if it's something about me that's keeping this business from growing.
Wow. That's some naked honesty right there.
Isn't it though?
Wow.
That type of humility and then the accompanying courage to say, hey, coach, let's pop the hood and let's see what's underneath there and see what I might be doing that's having an adverse effect on this operation. And I've been working with that guy for 4 years now. And the amount of growth that has happened in his life, and I would say the qualitative growth that's happened in his business. I wouldn't say that he's doubled the size of the business yet, but he and the business are in a healthier spot than they've ever been. So there's that courage. Somebody who's, I don't know, I'm at a crossroads. I don't know which way to go. Somebody who's courageous and they're willing to pop the hood. I also think people who, I just lost my train of thought.
We have a way to edit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me mark this. This
Thanks.
is what I'm doing over here, by the way. Where I was going to go next was just like, how do I know that I am really being honest with myself? Right? Because I've got people blowing smoke at me all day long.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think I'm being more honest with myself than maybe I really am.
Yeah.
That's where I was going to go with that.
Okay.
But but if that,
let's go there.
If that doesn't resonate, then
let's go there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll just pick right back up. I'll say two more things.
Yeah.
So I think two more criteria or two more qualities. I'll say three qualities.
Okay.
One of them is people who are doing something they've never done before. They're like, man, I feel like I'm a little bit out over my tips. I'm facing into a horizon I've never faced into before. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. So there's a humility in being able to admit that. And then another quality is people who want something more. They want something different. Sometimes people are really clear. Sometimes leaders are really clear about what they want. They are running at a pace that's not sustainable. They want something different. Sometimes people carry this ambiguous sense of, I don't know exactly what it is that I want, but I know I want something different than what I'm currently getting. I need some help figuring out what that even is. And then I would say the last thing is the folks that I tend to have the most fun with, and we tend to do the best work together, and they tend to grow the most, are people who are smart and curious, people who want to learn. They're not afraid to either crack open a book or listen to an audiobook or try some creative practices, do something a little different. But there's often as a measure of intelligence that comes along with that.
So executives, business owners that are at this point identified a common problem, which is they've heard so much affirmation. They're like President Bartlett. They don't know what to believe, maybe, but they're smart enough to know there's a lot of it they shouldn't believe. And how do they avoid internalizing all that and maintaining this? Maybe the way to say it is maintaining this separation so that they can get outside themselves and look at where they are in the business relative to everyone else.
Yeah, that's a great question, John. Every coaching engagement that I do starts with a self-awareness exercise. Really, it's that, like any journey you want to take, you got to know what is the point you're starting at, the you are here place. And the way that we do that is through a self-awareness tool. It's called the Leadership Circle Profile 360. And it's the best instrument I've ever come across for doing just that, for fostering that self-awareness and getting crystal clear feedback. And so this is a great way at a glance to involve feedback from 360 degrees around you. So we'll get their direct reports. They'll have a chance, if they identify anybody as a peer or anybody who might go in that category, another category, they can have individuals whose feedback comes to them directly, but they get 360 degrees of feedback, and it's done in a way that is statistically significant and normed against a database, an underlying database of leaders. And what this does is it's almost like an MRI for your leadership. And we get to see at a glance, how does that leader see himself or herself? And how are they perceived by the people around them? And because of the way the assessment is done, people who provide the feedback it's a safe way for them to be honest. And it's a safe way for the leader to be honest about himself or herself. And so very quickly at a glance, we're able to see what's working, what's not working. Where is this leader self-deceived, perhaps, thinking they're more effective in a certain way than they actually are? The other side of it is too, John, that this happens as well, is that leaders discover ways in which they are effective that they don't even realize. They come to see things about themselves that people appreciate that they didn't realize people appreciated, which in my mind is as important as developing the awareness for what your blind spots are and how you need to grow. So this gives us a really solid picture of where they are at the beginning of the journey. And it's find it to be pretty reliable as far as feedback goes.
Now I could go down a bunny trail with that. I love that, but I'm going to avoid doing that. But because I want to get to a success story or two, you shared a couple.
Yeah.
I think it'd be great if you could share some outcomes that help illustrate the great work you do.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'll give you a few different stories. Let me tell you a few things that I believe. I believe that whole people make for better leaders. And the experience of life tends to fragment all of us. And boy, leaders are no exception to that. And so one way of thinking about coaching is that I walk with people on that long journey back towards wholeness. So they bring a whole self into their business leadership. And because they become more inwardly sound and others focused, that the business and the commercial success follows. It's not one or the other, that it's both a great way to live and a great way to lead. Everything comes together. And so one of the things that's really cool for me is to see like a particular leader who had invested a tremendous amount in the people around them and woke up one day and realized, I haven't really given any attention to myself in a long time. And this was a leader who was in a pretty difficult situation with a co-owner. And this was a leader who was in that power relationship we talked about earlier, was a leader who didn't step into his power. He was more of one who would shrink back. And so we did a variety of things. We took a look at that power relationship. We also took a look at the holistically portion of inwardly sound. Like this leader didn't have enough energy. Like they were like physical energy was low. They had not invested enough in themselves physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And so we started working there. And as we worked there, they started to gain more capacity internally. And then we started working on that power dynamic. And as they began to recover their voice, they were actually able to engage in the situation with their co-owner and make meaningful progress in an area where before that, they'd really shrunk back from. And now that leader is at a place of greater freedom because they have a resolved relationship with that co-owner and is finding more of their voice and more of their joy in their work again. So that would be one of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. What great work you do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Just delighted that we could have you on to share what you're up to and how you're serving folks. I can't imagine there aren't some folks that wouldn't want to be in touch. So let's tell them how they can do that.
That's kind, John. Thank you. So a simple way to get in touch with me is you could go to my personal website, johnott.com, and you can learn a little bit more about the work that I do with leaders there. There's also a contact form. You could also send me an email if you wanted to, just john@exceptionalleaders.com. It's an easy way to get a hold of me. And you can also check out the work that we do with teams at exceptionalleaders.com. That's where it's not just about the CEO, but it's about all the leaders on the team.
Fantastic. John Ott from Exceptional Leaders. John, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, John. It has been an honor.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, folks, just a couple of quick things before we let you go for today. You remember how John said in this interview that others see more ways that we bring value and that they see good things in us than we see ourselves? I want you to extend that to your professional services practice. If you're a coach, an attorney, a consultant, CPA, here's the big, hairy, audacious idea that clients see more value in you than you see yourself. And if you buy that, it changes everything in your business. I'm leading up to something here. I've written a book about that. It's called The Generosity Mindset, A Journey to Business Success by Raising Your Confidence, Value, and Prices. If those are concepts that appeal to you, then I've written this book for you. Go to thegenerositymindset.com to learn more and to learn where to get the book. Also, I want to thank you if you're listening to this show, because by definition, if you're listening to this show, you're supporting us, and we have gotten so much great support over the years. This is show number 858, I think, of North Fulton Business Radio, and it boggles my mind that we've gotten this far. But when I think about the support we've gotten from you, it's understandable because you have supported us in so many ways. You like the shows on social media, you share them, you send us great guests. In fact, John came my way because of Jason Etheridge. So Jason, thank you. But that's how we keep it going here at North Fulton Business Radio, because of you. And you have helped us become the voice of business in the North Fulton region and beyond. And without you, we're nothing. So thank you for that support. Thank you for your encouragement. We appreciate you. So for my guest, John Ott, I'm John Ray. Join us next time here on North Fulton Business Radio.